Hello! So today we are going to be discussing the fourth volume in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, A Feast for Crows. Just as a heads up, there will be spoilers for this book and the previous three volumes in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. So, before going into this book, one of the key things to know is that this book and the fifth book, A Dance with Dragons, they were supposed to be one book. However, George R. R. Martin decided that he needed to split them up by location. So, A Feast for Crows primarily covers King's Landing, the Riverlands, the Vale, the Iron Islands, Dorne, and Bravos. There are also scenes at the Wall and in the Reach as well. We also don't have all of the point of view characters together. So let's get into some of those point of view characters. So, two of the big ones are Jaime and Cersei Lannister. So they kind of continue to drift apart. This started in a storm of swords after Jaime comes back after being held prisoner at Riverrun and having lost his hand. Obviously, his experiences of Fallout changed him and how he kind of views the world. And him and Cersei, they start butting heads. Like, for example, in A Storm of Swords, one of the things that they disagree on is if Tyrion is guilty of killing Joffrey or not. So this book is the continuation of that process. It's interesting to note that in this book, both Cersei and Jaime kind of lean into and chafe against their Lannister identities at the same time. So Cersei has a lot of negative thoughts about her father, Tywin. Like, for example, she has this line where she thinks about, like, how he's going to hell, basically. And she also thinks about, like, how he was kind of a scary and intimidating father figure. But she's also trying to emulate him. She tries to be this very brutal, no-nonsense kind of leader. However, she kind of lacks Tywin's filter, for lack of a better word. Like, Tywin was obviously a very violent and brutal person, but he was able to kind of, like, have this filter and kind of be a little bit more controlled in his violence, I guess, compared to Cersei. One of my favorite moments of her kind of demonstrating this is how in one of her small council meetings, the topic of Sansa Stark comes up. And she goes on this big unhinged rant about how she tried to educate Sansa and make her less ignorant in the world, and she let her play and get to know her children. And her small council, they're just taken aback because it is truly an unhinged rant, and they're just like, okay, ma'am. And then they talk, in a small council, they talk about how Jon Snow has been elected as the new Lord Commander of Night's Watch, and how it looks like he's helping Stannis. And Cersei's solution is to send an assassin after Jon Snow. And she thinks about how Catelyn Tully should have taken him out, and about how she was too much of a mouse to do that. And I'm just like, honestly, her and Catelyn Stark should have been besties. I mean, really. I mean, she tried to help educate her daughter, and then she takes out her troublesome stepson. I mean, honestly, what more could you ask for in a bestie? We love Cersei in this house. She is so unhinged and really fun to read. Her chapters kind of have like a dark humor quality to them. So Jaime, a big moment for him that I think kind of encapsulates how he's changing and about how he's still kind of the same person he was in some ways, is when he goes to lift the siege at Riverrun. So his solution to this, because he can't take up arms against the Starks and Tullys under his oath to Catelyn Stark. And so how he does this is he threatens to have Edmure Tully's baby watched with a trebuchet. So yes, he ends it without taking up arms against the Tullys and the Starks, but it's also like a very violent threat. It's funny because I had just finished reading this chapter and I was hanging out with my family and I was telling my dad about this and I was like, those Lannisters, like, sweet Jesus. And he was like, they sound like they need Jesus. And I thought that was funny. So another big point of view that we are introduced to in this book are the Islanders. So, um, basically what we find out is, well, we found this out in book 3, is that Balon Greyjoy has passed, and his brother Euron Greyjoy has taken control of the Iron Islands. So, Aeron Greyjoy decides to call for a king's moot to avoid Euron ruling over the Ironborn. Aeron has a traumatic history with Euron, and so that's part of why he's so gung-ho about making sure Euron doesn't get to rule the Iron Islands. In addition to Euron just being really evil, even by Ironborn standards. So in this King's Moot, we see Euron, Victarion, who is Aeron's brother, and who he wants to rule the Iron Islanders, and Asha Greyjoy, their niece, and Fionn Greyjoy's sister, who we met back in A Clash of Kings. They all go for what is called the Seastone Chair. And ultimately, Euron ends up winning, and Asha flees. Victarion kind of works with Euron because there's not much else he can do. Euron won the election, and Aeron has to try to figure out what to do. It's really interesting how the Ironborn are kind of just like backwards people, but in a way, this King's Moot is probably one of the more democratic ways of a new leader being installed that we see in the series. Like, it's kind of like how the Night's Watch, they're supposed to be kind of meritocratic with the election of the Lord's Commander. It's interesting. So, we also get to see Dorne. So the big plot is Arianne Martell. She tries to crown Myrcella Baratheon to provoke the Lannisters into fighting Dorne and to secure her place as ruler of Dorne. So Dorne had gender-neutral succession. So she's Doran Martell's oldest daughter, and so she's next in line to be the Princess of Dorne. So ultimately, this plan gets Myrcella harmed and heiress Oakheart killed when Doran's guard Ariahota finds them and they get in a big fight. So we kind of learn why Arianne feels this way. So it kind of seemed like Doran favored her brother Quentyn. We find out that it's a little more complicated than that. So basically, she wasn't meant to rule Dorne. She was meant to be the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. She was supposed to marry Viserys Targaryen, Daenerys' brother. But unfortunately, he passed. And so Quentyn is going to find Daenerys and is going to marry her and try to win them over to Dorne's side, and they're going to try and take down the Lannisters. And this kind of sets up Dorne's expanded rule as the story is going to continue. So we also see Brienne. So she was sent by Jaime to go find Sansa Stark. She kind of ventures around in the Riverlands and she meets some people. She meets Dick Crabb, who says that he helped get Sansa and Dantos onto a ship. This doesn't end up panning out. They get ambushed and Dick Crabb ends up being killed, and Brienne has to fight some members of the Bloody Mummers, or the Brave Companions. And then another key person she meets on her ventures is Septon Maribald. He gives like this big speech about how war impacts the common people. Kind of like the capstone of this speech, and it's kind of like the too long don't read. So we find out he fought in the War of the Nine Penny Kings. And when Podrick Payne, who has decided to squire for Brienne after Tyrion's disappearance, asks about the War of the Nine Penny Kings, Septon Maribald says, "So they called it. I never saw a king nor earned a penny. It was a war, though. That it was." And it kind of encapsulates how the poor people, don't really know the people they're fighting for, and they also aren't really rewarded for it. Another third person she bumps into is Lady Stoneheart, who is resurrected Catelyn. She almost gets hanged. So Foros of Myr kind of updates us on what's going on. So Catelyn Stark has taken over the Brotherhood without banners and has kind of taken them in a more vengeful direction post the Red Wedding. And so Brianna's put on trial, and Lady Stoneheart says she either has to give up Jaime, or she's going to be killed alongside Podrick, who, as I mentioned, has started to squire for her, or Hyle Hunt, who is one of the people that's kind of been one of her companions throughout her adventures in the Riverlands. The last line is, she screamed a word or something like that, and we're not told what it is, but the common consensus is that it was sword, so we don't know how the storyline's going to end. And I don't think we find out in A Dance with Dragons what happens, so I guess we'll have to wait for the winter. So Samwell is sent to Old Town with Gilly, Maester Aemon, and Daeron. So obviously Maester Aemon is getting on in years, and Jon Snow decides that Sam is going to take Aemon's place as Maester. And along the way, Sam learns about the prince that was promised prophecy, and we also find out that Jon Snow swapped Gilly and Mance Rayder's babies. So that's kind of meant to show that Daenerys, her role in the story is going to be important with the prince that was promised prophecy. Like, she has a big role to play with her being the mother of dragons and all. And then also with finding out about Jon Snow swapping the babies, it shows how being Lord Commander, he has to make like hard choices to try to keep people safe. So he was worried that because
Mance Rayder's baby?
he has king's blood, that Melisandre would try to burn the baby in like a magic blood ritual. But obviously this isn't good for Gilly or either of the babies like being taken away from their families. So they have to hit Braavos first, and this is another interesting moment for Sam. So they are chilling in Braavos, but Maester Aemon is sick, so they can't head on to Old Town. And during their stay there, Daeron, who is one of the people that Jon Snow sent with them, kind of defects, and Sam goes to try and find him to find out what the heck is going on. And on his way there, he bumps into Arya. So that was kind of a cool little cameo for Arya in somebody else's chapter. He also gets into a fight with Daeron with the whole desertion thing. So that was kind of fun to see. We also see his relationship with Gilly start to grow. He's kind of trying to help her stay strong with the whole baby swap thing. And there's this moment where he's kind of like questioning their relationship, and Kojimo, who is one of the crew members on the ship that they were able to get from Braavos, gives a speech about like how Gilly knows it's not going to work out, but she just wants to be able to be with Sam even if it's just for a little bit. I thought that was really sweet. She also talks about how she doesn't understand why the Night's Watch is so strict on their members having relationships and families and all that, because the crew of the ship that they're taking from Braavos to Old Town, they are from the Summer Islands, and they're kind of more like hippy-dippy and free love, all that good stuff. So they're like, I don't get why there's so many rules, which understandable. I like that scene because of that really sweet thing about like how even if it's not going to last, it's good to enjoy a relationship for a time, and kind of like a more modern perspective on relationships compared to what we see with the Westerosi characters. So I thought that was really cool. So as mentioned, Arya is in Braavos. So she tries to join this organization. They're called the Faceless Men. But to join a faceless men, you have to give up your previous identity. So she's struggling with this because a big part of her arc is her desire to be with her family and to go home to Winterfell. One scene, she has to give up all of her stuff. And one of those things she has to give up is Needle, and she struggles to do that because it was a gift from Jon Snow, and to her it kind of represents all of the people that she's had to leave behind. So like her parents, her brothers and sisters, and all that stuff. So that was a really big moment because she decides that she can't give up the sword, so she like hides it. She also shows that she's not willing to let go because, as previously mentioned, Daeron is kind of like deserting the Night's Watch, and obviously the penalty for that is death. So when she finds out, she takes him out after his fight with Sam. So that was another example. And after she kills him, she goes to the leader of the Faceless Men and talks about it, and as punishment, they blind her. And so I guess she's going to have to try to learn how to carry out her missions without her vision for a while. It's interesting to see. I think she does come back in the next book, because I think she overlaps in the two. So we'll see. So, speaking of the Stark sisters, Sansa has taken on the identity of Elaine Stone, Peter Baelish, aka Littlefinger's bastard daughter. She kind of gets to see what's going on with the political situation in the Vale. Littlefinger kind of manipulated Lysa Arryn into keeping the Vale out of the War of the Five Kings. And so we don't really know too much about what's going on up until now. We kind of see her stepping up and learning more about leadership. She's taken over the care of her cousin, Sweet Robin, and she's learned how to kind of be the person that knows how to get through to him and manipulate him. So that's kind of cool to see her kind of tapping into her savvier, smarter side. We also learn more about Peter, aka Littlefinger's schemes. So he's going to marry her to Sweet Robin's heir, Harry Harding, I think is how that's pronounced. But basically, if Sweet Robin dies, then Harry, aka Harry the Heir, will take over the Eyrie. And so he's kind of betting on Robin Arryn dying, and I think he's trying to kill him with the sleep, I think is what's implied by this discussion. And so he's going to marry Sansa to Harry the Heir, and then at their wedding, he's going to reveal that she's Sansa Stark, and in the Vale is going to help her take Winterfell back, and he's going to kind of be in control of the Vale and the North through Sansa and Harry. So that was really interesting. I'm excited to see what Sansa gets up to in the next few books. I don't think she's in A Dance with Dragons, so we're going to have to wait till Winds of Winter for that. So those were all of the major point of view characters. There are some other ones that I didn't get to, but for example, one of them is Aerys Oakheart, but he's a one-off, and he really only serves to kind of give us some insight into Dorne and Arianne Martell. So I already discussed that storyline. So I think what's going to determine if you enjoy this book is how you feel about the second book in the series, A Clash of Kings. So both of those books kind of deal with the fallout of a major upheaval. So we have Tywin's death in the Red Wedding, in A Storm of Swords, and then in Game of Thrones we have Ned Stark's death and the start of the War of the Five Kings. So both of these books, as we've stated, they follow the death of a patriarch of the family, and we get to see how their children deal with this, as well as the rest of their families. Both books expand on the world of Westeros and take us to new settings. So in Clash of Kings, that's the first time we see the Iron Islands and kind of get to know the Ironborn and the Greyjoys. And in this book, it's the first time we get to see Dorne and get to know the Martells a little better. So as previously stated, this book shows the fallout of their death of Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister. Something that's interesting with the two new locations that both books introduce. So they both kind of have a negative opinion on these two leaders. So Ned Stark, he treated Phelon Greyjoy relatively well, and he wasn't responsible for the death of Balon Greyjoy's other sons. But if you look at it from the Ironborn's perspective, and especially Theon's, who was a hostage, it kind of makes sense that they wouldn't be the biggest Ned Stark cheerleaders. Tywin, obviously, he at least allowed the deaths of Elia Martell and her children and was never punished for it. Dorne, they are very much more justified in disliking Tywin Lannister and wanting revenge, since it wasn't their fault that the rebellion started and all that jazz. And with the Iron Islands, it was Balon kicking off a rebellion, so it is kind of more his fault that bad things happened versus Dorne. But either way, it's really interesting to see how these two people, unintentionally on Ned's part and intentionally on Tywin's, kind of, even though they did have people that cared about them, there are people that don't like them. So why do I think George decided to add some of these new point of view characters that we didn't really know? So, I feel like there are a lot of parallels with the Greyjoys and Martells to the Starks and Lannisters. So, as previously mentioned, there was Robert's Rebellion, and Elia Martell dies, and then the Starks, they lost Lyanna, Ned's sister. So both of those families are kind of dealing with the loss of a family member due to the Targaryens. And then with the Greyjoys, they're kind of tearing each other apart a bit, which we kind of see with the Lannisters as well. With Jaime and Cersei, kind of drifting apart, not even just romantically, but as siblings. And then obviously Tyrion being the one to kill Tywin. And there's also ties to the Targaryens with Dorne trying to plot with them to get revenge on the Baratheons and Lannisters. I also kind of get to see how the War of the Five Kings impacted Westeros and how that left power vacuums. And so now you have people like Euron Greyjoy and Rand Martell kind of stepping up to fill those vacuums that have been left in the aftermath of everything that's happened. We also get to see how a lot of common Westerosi family issues look in different cultural context. So succession is something that impacts family dynamics a lot. We see this, for example, Jon Snow, while he loves his brother Robb, there is jealousy there because they are similarly aged, but Robb is the heir to Winterfell, and Jon isn't, and so there's this kind of bit of a jealous streak there, but they do love each other and get along. And with Arianne Martell not being sure about how Rand feels about her, and if he wants her to rule Dorne, she's kind of jealous of Quentyn. Like I said, it's cool to see how even in different cultures in Westeros that these issues repeat. So another big thing to talk about is if splitting the point of views helped or hindered the book. I would say yes and no. So I do think it was good to kind of give us some time to see the impact of the War of the Five Kings and all the chaos of A Storm of Swords. Um, but I do think, like, for example, a big thing is like the Lannisters processing things. And so I think if you had at least Tyrion in this book, I think it would have strengthened that aspect of the book, and we would have got to see all three Lannister siblings dealing with Tywin stuff. That would have been fun. So we do also, a fun thing about this book that I want to mention is that we get like a lot of like title drops. There's constant allusions to crows eating the dead. Alright, so I'm gonna read some of my favorites. Every crow in the Seven Kingdoms should pay homage to you, father. From Castamere to the Blackwater, you fed them well. The crows shall feast upon us all if you go this way, sweet sister. So those two are Jaime, and he's kind of, in the first one, obviously, he's kind of meditating on the impact that Tywin Lannister has had in the world. And the second one is him kind of like, Cersei, what are you doing? This is not going to end well. When she's talking about like everything that she's getting up to and some of her small council appointments and all that stuff. And in this quote is from Euron Greyjoy. A crow can espy death from afar, and I say to all of Westeros is dying. Those who follow me shall feast until the end of days. Um, to me, this kind of encapsulates, as I previously mentioned, the power vacuum that has been left by the War of the Five Kings, and about how new powers are kind of stepping up to the plate.
So, what were my overall thoughts on this book? So, I enjoyed it a lot. However, I do feel like some of the chapters could have been trimmed down a bit. Like, for example, Brienne, I do feel like you could have condensed some of her chapters. And you could have merged some of the point of view characters. So, like, for example, with the King's Moot, I don't think you needed all three Greyjoys. I think you could have just had it from Asha's point of view, and it would have worked a little better because we've known Asha since A Clash of Kings. Speaking of The Clash of Kings, that book is also kind of slower, focuses on characters, um, but it does have that big mic drop moment with the Battle of the Blackwater. This book doesn't have anything like that. All of the characters they do end on pretty solid cliffhangers, and you are excited to find out what happens to them. But because there isn't that big mic drop moment, as I said, it does feel a little incomplete. Let me know if y'all would want me to talk more in depth about some of the plot lines in this book. There's a lot that I didn't get to. It's like, for example, in Cersei's chapters, she has her Volunteer prophecy where she's going to lose her children, and one of her younger brothers is going to kill her. She thinks it's going to be Tyrion, which is part of why she hates him so much. This could be a video all on its own, but a big theme of this book is the struggle that female leaders face. Asha, Arianne, and Cersei, all their chapters touch on this, and it's a really interesting theme running through this book. I also neglected to talk about in my overview of Sam's point of view chapters is what's going on with the Citadel. We do kind of learn that there might be some, I don't know if shady is the right word, but some interesting stuff going on there. I also neglected to mention that the Ironborn they also have plans for Daenerys. Um, that we will learn about more in Advance with Dragons. So I guess I can talk more about that when I review that book. Alrighty. So don't forget to comment. What would you rate this book? Um, like this video and subscribe. Thank y'all so much for watching. Bye.